Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, the rookies, they reported to training camp on Thursday. Who are you intrigued to see? Who am I intrigued to see? We'll talk about that plus a whole lot more coming up on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, July 21st, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show. Of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, thank you. We definitely appreciate you. The show has not been on YouTube very long, but, man, it has grown in a major, major way. So thank you, Raider Nation, for making that happen. And thank you to my man Ari for making that happen as well. He has us up on YouTube each and every day looking good and sounding good. You can check out Ari on Twitter at Ari Produces. Again, been doing a great job. We definitely appreciate him. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can at your boy Q254. And if you want to hit up the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We didn't have any calls or texts on Thursday's show. That's because we had a really good interview with Trevor Sikkema from PFF.com talking all things Max Crosby. If you did not read that article, I encourage you to go back and check it out. Really good stuff from Trevor, and hopefully you enjoyed that interview that was on Thursday's show as well. But we'll get back to calls and texts coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Segment number 2, we're going to talk all things rookies. Again, the rookies, they reported to camp on Thursday, so that's what we're going to focus in on. Guys that I'm looking at, that I'm intrigued by, that I think could get out there and help the Raiders sooner rather than later. And we'll talk about veterans on Monday because, again, on Tuesday is when the veterans report, and then on Wednesday, that's when the first day of practice is on the 26th. So it's all going to kind of go in chronological order, but today we'll focus in on the rookies in segment number 2, and then segment number 1, we'll do the news and notes of the day, whatever I kind of gathered to close out this segment. So off top, let's start with Marcus Peters. He's a guy that's a free agent out there right now. I talked about him quite a bit on Thursday's show that it feels like he's going to be signed sooner rather than later, especially when Vinny Bonsignore from the RJ and, of course, Raider Nation Radio 920 as well put out the tweet. Feels like Marcus Peters to the Raiders is inevitable. Vic Tafer from The Athletic has been talking about Marcus Peters. It's one of those things that it's like, okay, I'm expecting it to happen sooner rather than later, but it hasn't happened just yet. And Marcus Peters is a longtime vet. He's a guy that gets his hands on the ball quite a bit, a bunch of interceptions in his career, and a bunch of pick sixes in his career. But in 2022, 13 games, 1 sack, 1 interception. 2021, no games. He was coming back from a torn ACL. He tore the ACL right before the season started. 2020, played in 14 games, had 1 sack and 4 interceptions. And then in 2019, he played with the Rams and the Ravens. No sacks, but 5 picks and 3 touchdowns. So that's Marcus Peters. The last few years, kind of his resume. Sounds like he's going to be a member of the Silver and Black sooner rather than later. But Vinny Bonsignore was a guest on my radio show on Thursday. So I asked him straight up, like, hey, looking at your tweet, seems like it's the inevitable that Marcus Peters is going to be signed sooner rather than later. So what's your thoughts? Here's Vinny Bonsignore on that.
I would say yes. It hasn't, obviously happened, and until he signs on the dotted line, there's always, the possibility that it might not happen. But the sense that I get is it's something that is probably going to happen at some point. Now, the thing with Marcus is, I don't know if it's necessary that he's there day one of camp, maybe a little bit further down. I think with him, he knows how to get ready, and really it's just about making sure that his legs are going to be able to get him through the season. That's really the only concern. How much gas does he have left in that tank, and why use any of it in training camp when he really doesn't need to?
No, that makes a lot of sense. He's a veteran. He's been there, done that. He's also a guy that gets his hands on the ball. But the thing that I have, and the kind of, not hang up, but when I think about Marcus Peters being added to the mix, he's one outside corner. So that means there's one outside corner spot left. How does that competition shake out? Who do you think's the leader in the clubhouse for that other spot?
Well, I think Nate Hobbs, gets probably the first crack at the other perimeter cornerback position. And then I think that, guys like Jacorian Bennett, Duke Shelley, David Long now become your rotational guys. And we know that, there's times where you've got 4 cornerbacks, on the field, 5 sometimes with your slot guys. So I think there's if Marcus Peters is still, some semblance of him and gives them an upgrade, then that improves your depth behind him, and having those guys become role players. A Jacorian Bennett, I'm sure that, his best days are probably ahead of him, probably some starting days ahead of him, but maybe not right off the bat, and where he can come in and play that kind of a role. So, but that's a good problem to have, right? It's if Marcus Peters is Marcus Peters, and you hope that Nate Hobbs is back on the right track and see who that slot cornerback is going to be, and then you're going to have some what could be some pretty decent depth back there.
So there you go. You hear Vinny talking about Marcus Peters and the fact that it feels like he's going to get signed sooner rather than later, but he doesn't need all of training camp to be ready to rock and roll. Right, so there's that. And then you heard my follow-up talking about, well, okay, you get Marcus Peters, then you only have one outside corner position still available. Who's the leader in the clubhouse for that? And he said, really, it's basically a competition. I mean, you heard him. So I'm looking at the slot. I'm thinking, okay, is Nate Hobbs going to compete in the slot? Is Tyler Hall going to own that spot? And then, again, all the guys, a Brandon Faison, a Duke Shelley, maybe Nate Hobbs is outside. I mean, there's plenty of different dudes. Jacorian Bennett, the 4th-round pick out of Maryland, where does he go, right? How does he fit into the equation? I feel like there's going to be a ton of competition at the cornerback position if the Raiders go out there and sign Marcus Peters, especially if they sign him sooner rather than later, but definitely something to pay attention to. And, of course, we'll be watching when we're out there at the practice facility starting on the 26th. My final little nugget I have for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes of the day, has nothing to do with the Raiders. It has to do with the Washington Commanders. They were officially sold. The owners, they had a unanimous vote, and they decided that the Josh Harris group, they're going to get the ownership of the Washington Commanders. So Dan Snyder is officially out. Matter of fact, it sounds like that the Commanders might not be the Commanders much longer. It sounds like the Josh Harris group that has Magic Johnson involved may decide to change the name just to kind of rinse off that Dan Snyder stink that's still on that team. But he didn't leave without some fireworks, right? The NFL has actually fined Dan Snyder $60 million. And remember the Mary Jo White investigation that went into the sexual harassment of people that are working in the building and all the workplace misconduct and the money that he apparently kept away from other franchises across the NFL? Yeah, all of that came back to bite him in the backside. $60 million is what the NFL fined him. And let's be honest about the situation. He just sold the Commanders for $6.05 billion. So $60 million sounds like a lot to me. Sounds like a lot to you. It's literally 1% of the sale price. So, Dan Snyder is getting fined $60 million. That's a ton of money. But when you just made $6.05 billion, it is absolutely nothing. But the statement put out is the NFL has fined former Washington Commander owner Dan Snyder $60 million after an independent investigation concluded he sexually harassed a team employee and that the team withheld revenue from the NFL. And let me stop right there, because obviously sexually harassing a team employee is bad. But let it be known, the only reason he got fined $60 million is because the team withheld revenue from the NFL. If the team hadn't done that, and the reason I say that with confidence is when that little nugget had rolled out while he was still owner. I remember John McClain, he was at the Houston Chronicle at that time in Sports Radio 610 in Houston. He was on my radio show, and he said, Q, once you start cheating the NFL and once you start costing other owners money, that's when they're going to come get you. And, well, he cost other owners money. He cost other franchises money, and that's why the NFL got him and fined him $60 million. Mary Jo White, she was the one who did the investigation. She concluded in her investigation, she said that the Commanders withheld approximately $11 million in revenue that should have been shared with other teams. The investigation also found that Dan Snyder sexually harassed a former team employee. White also noted that the Commanders failed to fully cooperate with her investigation, so he was fined $60 million. But, of course, none of that really came out until the sale was complete and the owners voted to get Dan Snyder out. But it's a good day because Dan Snyder is no longer an owner of that Washington football team that looks like the name is going to change sooner rather than later. But that's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, the rookies reported. So who am I intrigued by and why? That's all coming up after I tell you about our great sponsor, which is eBay Motors. They are our partners, and they've teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So, with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And I talked to you on Thursday about CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown. I could talk about the running backs, but why do that? Let's talk about some players that, well, Raider Nation knows very, very well. How about Devontae Adams and Patrick Mahomes? Vinny said, looking to make a smooth turn in fantasy football snake drafts with the last pick in the first round, the first pick in the second round, you'll be guaranteed to have two of the surest performers by going all AFC West with Raiders wide receiver Devontae Adams and Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes. Adams has proved he remains a reliable top selection in Las Vegas, while Mahomes will again operate with both the highest floor and ceiling among the standout luxury options at his position. Again, Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, tail lights, alternators, shocks and struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what your part need, what your part you need. They understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Never talking about Russell Wilson when I say that. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about the rookies. They all reported on Thursday to the Raiders facility, the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center. Of course, the first day of practice is not till the 26th. The veterans, they'll report on the 25th, and again, they'll all come together on the 26th, so I'm looking forward to that. But since the rookies reported and the veterans have not, and it's funny, speaking of the veterans, you can kind of tell that it's almost training camp time. Myself, my man Vegas Jess, Lil Q, we were all out on Thursday evening, just going out to get a bite to eat, hanging out, watching little Aces basketball, and boom, we ran into Deuce Gruden. We ran into Brandon Parker. We ran into Colton Miller, all in the same place. And I don't think any of them came to be in the same spot. Well, I think Colton Miller and Brandon Parker were hanging out, but Deuce Gruden definitely was not hanging out with everybody. But it just so happens, they were near the facility. We were at a restaurant near the facility, and they just all happened to show up. And everyone's, smiles right now. Training camp's right around the corner. Time to get things going. So everyone's feeling good about themselves. But it was funny just to see so many guys from the Raiders just all of a sudden start rolling in. And, well, getting ready, like I said, for training camp, having a little bite to eat and hanging out, all smiles, really personable with everybody that they ran into, shaking hands, taking pictures. If you wanted an autograph, whatever like that, they were doing it. But it was, again, just a restaurant, setting. So, with that being said, the veterans don't report till 25th. But the rookies, they're in-house right now. So what rookies am I intrigued by? And I feel like it's super easy to say, well, Tyree Wilson, he was the 7th overall pick, first round. He's the guy that's going to make a difference on the defensive line. And, yeah, you could say that. I'm sure some people will probably say Aiden O'Connell, the 4th-round pick out of Purdue. Want to see what he's able to do. Can he be the quarterback of the future? And I think that'd be a fair argument or fair conversation. But that's not where I'm going. And it's funny. I actually got 4 guys that I'm intrigued by. 3 guys that were drafted and 1 undrafted free agent. So I'm going to go ahead and roll from the guys I'm most intrigued by to, it's going to be like this is the top tier to the lower tier. But they're all very important. So I don't want to make it sound like, this guy, I'm interested in it, but not really. But, again, I'm going to go in order of the guys that I think can help this team and contribute with this team probably sooner rather than later. So I'm going to start in the 5th round. Chris Smith, the safety out of Georgia. I just think that the Raiders need to find and establish that guy who could be that last line of defense. Right? I mean, he's been called the young Jerron Harmon by Dave Ziegler. He's been called a young Jerron Harmon by Josh McDaniels. He's been called a young Jerron Harmon by Patrick Graham. So with all that being said about Jerron Harmon, Chris Smith needs to step up and be that guy. The question is, he's a 5th-round pick, so he's not expected to go in there and, be a starter right away, but what can he establish in training camp? How much can he push a guy like Trayvon Merrick, right? Can he be that dude? right? Of course, Marcus Epps was the guy that they signed as a free agent from the Philadelphia Eagles, so he's going to be in the mix. But is there a possibility that Chris Smith can push Trayvon Merrick out? And I'm not necessarily saying make him be a guy that ends up getting released, but is there a certain point where Chris Smith could step up and all of a sudden be that guy? I do think with the production he had in college the last 2 seasons as a back-to-back national champion from Georgia, I think that he can do some good things for the Raiders on the back end of that defense, and they need to find that guy, that eraser. I like to reference Earl Thomas, and I talked about this on my radio show on Thursday as well. I like to reference Earl Thomas as the eraser of that Seattle Seahawks, that Legion of Boom defense. When guys made mistakes, Earl Thomas was able to be that guy that cleaned them up. The Raiders have to find that guy, the eraser, the guy that can clean everything up when somebody makes a mistake. They can also come away with the ball when the ball's right there. Trayvon Merrick has not been able to do that consistently. He has 1 career interception going into year 3. Chris Smith is a guy that's had, 6 in the last 2 seasons at Georgia. I'm not saying that that's going to translate to the NFL right away, but once you get that production, once you get comfortable with the ball in your hand, you can do it on any level that you play at. So Chris Smith is the most intriguing guy that I'm looking at as far as the rookies in training camp. The next guy, I'm going to go to the 3rd round. Byron Young, 3rd-round pick, the defensive tackle out of Alabama. He's a guy that has been consistently stopping the run his whole career. He's been great at stopping the run. But he's a guy that last year at Alabama found a way to get to the quarterback. 5 sacks he had in 2022 at Alabama. And look, he's played a lot of games, a lot of football in college because he took advantage of the COVID year. So he was able to, be there a little bit longer than normal. And it somehow he just figured it out. Was that because he was older or was it because something clicked? He said when he was drafted by the Raiders and he jumped on the Zoom and we all talked to him, he said, it was a little bit of both. Opportunity, the fact that, he got on the field and he got more reps, and then 2, it also just kind of clicked. But if Byron Young could be part of a healthy rotation for the Raiders in that defensive line, especially that defensive tackle room, I think Bilal Nichols is going to do some good things. I think the Raiders are expecting Jerry Tillery to do some good things. Of course, they have other guys that they've drafted. They have other guys that, they brought in as free agents. So, it could be a healthy defensive tackle room. The funny thing about this, and I mentioned it to Vinny Bonsignore on my radio show on Thursday, I used to look at the Raiders' defensive line as probably a weakness of the team. Now looking at it just on paper, and again, it's just on paper, I'm looking at it as it might be the strength of the Raiders defense right now, just because it's pretty deep, especially when you put Tyree Wilson into the mix as well. He could be on the edge. He could potentially play in the middle as well. This actually could be the biggest strength of the Raiders defense is their defensive line, and that's clearly what Dave Ziegler has attempted to do, build it from the outside in, which many people have called into the podcast and said, hey, you build it from the trenches, Q. You got to build it from the trenches. Don't worry about the corners. Build it from the trenches. Well, Dave Ziegler obviously believes that as well, and that's what he's attempted to do. So it looks like the Raiders' defensive line can be a big-time strength, and Byron Young is a guy that I'm expecting to be part of a nice rotation. Do I expect him to be out there all the time? No. Not saying he's going to get the majority of the snaps, but I do think he could be part of a healthy rotation and really help out that Raiders defensive line. So that's the second guy that I'm looking at. And the third guy that's drafted that I'm focused in on and want to be intrigued by is on the offensive side of things, and that's 2nd-round pick tight end out of Notre Dame, Michael Mayer. I don't know what kind of catches he's going to get. I really don't. A lot of people say, well, he's going to get 60 catches, 800 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I have no idea. When you have Devontae Adams, when you have Hunter Renfrow, when you have Jacoby Myers, when you have Josh Jacobs, when you have all those weapons that they have offensively, I don't know how much he's going to get as far as catches and yards. But what I do know is that he was really good in the red zone at Notre Dame, and he really didn't have a quarterback that was worth the salt throwing on the ball. So Jimmy G, if healthy, hate to say that, but if healthy, he's really good in the red zone. Michael Mayer is really good in the red zone. So you put the 2 and 2 together. I think that he can really help out the Raiders' woes because they've had so many struggles in the red zone throughout, seems like the last decade, right? So if he can all of a sudden step up, you know what Devontae can do in the red zone. You know what Hunter could do in the red zone. And Jacoby Myers has the height where he can go up and high point a ball in the red zone as well. I think all of a sudden the red zone can be something that the Raiders are really successful in, but they've got to have all those guys working together. And I think Michael Mayer, the 2nd-round tight end out of Notre Dame, could be that dude. I'm really surprised he made it to the 2nd round. I think a lot of people, including the Raiders, are surprised that he made it to the 2nd round. I'm glad he did, and the Raiders were able to get him. So those are the 3 guys that I'm focused in on as far as rookies that were drafted. I have one guy that I'm looking at as an undrafted free agent. And look, there's a couple guys that you can really look at. You could say McClendon Curtis, the offensive lineman. You could say Dalton Wagner, the offensive lineman. I'm looking at Drake Thomas, the linebacker out of NC State. I know my man PE in North Carolina, he called the other day talking about Drake Thomas and basically said he can go. He's just a little bit smaller. But he was an undrafted free agent, the linebacker. He's a guy that, a lot of people are talking about, and he's on my radar because a lot of people are talking about him. I'm not going to lie and act like, I saw and scouted a lot of his film and think that he's going to be fantastic. I don't know. But I know that he's got the attention of a lot of people. So that's why I'm going to focus in on Drake Thomas when I'm out there at practice starting next week. I want to see what it's all about. Again, I'm expecting him to be undersized because that's what everyone has said. But I'm also expecting him to go out there and really ball out. And as an undrafted free agent, that's what you got to do. But with this staff, you can make the squad. If you remember going back to last year's training camp, 4 guys that were undrafted free agents all made the 53-man roster. So it doesn't matter, and Josh McDaniels has said this many times, it doesn't matter how you arrive with the Raiders, it's what you do once you get there. So Drake Thomas is going to have just as good of a chance as anybody else to make this Raiders roster. So those are the guys that I'm intrigued by, and those are the reason why I'm intrigued by those guys. Chris Smith, the 5th-round pick out of Georgia. Byron Young, the 3rd-round pick out of Alabama. Michael Mayer, the 2nd-round pick out of Notre Dame. And undrafted free agent Drake Thomas, linebacker, NC State. So who are you intrigued by as far as the rookies go? Remember, the veterans, they report on the 25th. First day of practice is on the 26th. 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts are coming up next as we close out the show on this Friday. This is the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a text from Southern Indiana Raiders. It says, hey, Q, Southern Indiana Raider here. I heard a call on the pod this morning that I wanted to respond to. I appreciate all the opinions that people have. I didn't watch who made the call, and I was too lazy to go back and get it. I just want to say to the fans that think McDaniels is on the hot seat that you had better accept the fact he isn't going anywhere regardless of this season. He'll get a minimum of 1 more season before he'll even be considered. I'm completely underwhelmed at the job he has done up until now. I really hope he gets the house in order and starts winning games in all caps. I don't care what label it gets, Patriots way, Raider way, Milky Way. I'm skeptical, but just being realistic. The current situation with the running back and quarterback position does not increase his chances. Again, that's from Southern Indiana Raider. And look, that's the thing about it. I don't care. I was very skeptical on Josh McDaniels when it was even rumored that he was going to get the job. I just thought he was going to be a guy that was going to be very tight-lipped, a guy that was going to be, no personality, not give you anything whatsoever, and he hasn't been that guy. Now, the one problem is he hasn't been a winning coach either. Only won 6 games his first year. So how does things change this year? I'm expecting him to be better because he went and got his guys. So now, okay, you're going to go get your guys. You got rid of a lot of guys that were Raider guys, and you brought in your guys. So, okay, fine. Now that you got the ingredients that you're looking for, go out there and cook a hell of a meal. So I think that there's a lot on him this year, but like you said, Southern Indiana Raider, he's not on the hot seat, in my opinion, not even close. So thank you so much, like I said, for that text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Grim Raider in Virginia. He's calling to talk about the Raiders and what they need to do to be actually Super Bowl contenders, and talks about commitment to excellence and what it means. Grim Raider in Virginia. Here he is.
Hey there, this is Grim Raider from Virginia. I was calling. I was the guy that called about that poem a little while back. But anyway, I just wanted to say something real quick. I'm a Raider for life, no matter what. Through the good times, bad times, and the heartbreaking times, which is probably with the bad times. But what makes me upset, really, I remember many times where they would have the lead and they would let it slip away by letting their foot off the pedal. That's just the part of, like, I don't know, being complacent, in my belief. The Raiders, they are a Super Bowl team contender and challenger only if they themselves believe they are, through hard work and discipline. They need to believe in themselves and their team as a whole. There's always room for improvements every day, no matter what. And that goes for all of us as a Raider Nation and as a whole nation in general. But anyway, focusing on the Raiders, they just got to want it so bad. And anyway, that's the whole part of what I believe the whole commitment to excellence is. So with that being said, just win, baby. Go Raiders.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And yeah, belief is huge, right? I mean, you got to believe that you're a winner and potential champ. Like, if you don't believe it, nobody else will. I always tell everyone, if you don't believe that you're the greatest, nobody else will. So you got to at least, fake it till you make it. You got to at least play the part. But you also got to go out there and you got to see the signs, and we need to see the signs. You got to start to see, the team coming together and guys, doing and looking like they understand what they're supposed to be doing. So they've got to build momentum. They've got to be able to trust the brother next to them. They've got to be able to really build a lot throughout training camp, which will get started next week. And then, of course, through preseason. And they got to start out hot, right? If the Raiders are going to be better than what most people expect, the first 3 out of 4 games are on the road. So they need to figure out how to come out of there at least 2-2, maybe even 3-1. If they can come out of there 3-1, I know that's asking for a lot, but man, you're cooking with grease in that situation. Then all of a sudden you're feeling good about yourself. So we'll see what they do. But thank you so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Next up, got a text from Raider Julian in Moraga. Hey, Q. First time text. Love the show. Appreciate the context. Love the breakdown on Super Bowl teams that made it on the roster, make up not paying a premier back. It actually hurts more than that they were close to a deal. I do think this team has a high ceiling with a lot of potential on defense with a solid offensive core. Hoping we see these rookies and second-year players step up. It's all up to developing these young guys for long-term success. To me, it seems like this regime is not mortgaging the future with bad contracts. So hopeful for the future. Thoughts? That's from Raider Julian in Moraga. And, yeah, that's the thing. That's from Raider Julian in Moraga. And, yeah, that's the thing. They're not going to mortgage the future. They're just not, right? They're trying to build this thing for the long haul, which is what they should do. And the only way that you can do that is you've got to be able to get production from young guys. You've got to be able to draft and develop. And that's what Dave Ziegler wants to do. I know he wants nothing more than to be able to draft a bunch of players, develop them, put them out there, and then if some make it where they give a contract extension, great. But if not, let them go and continue to develop players. Like, he wants to build this team through the draft like no other. And if he's able to do that, great. But they've got to be able to develop them. They've drafted the guys, especially the defense. 6 out of the 9 guys they drafted were defensive guys. Can they step their game up? Can they play at a high level? That's going to be the question. That's what we're all going to be looking for. But thank you, Raider Julian in Moraga. Shout out to Moraga, man. I went to a basketball camp there at St. Mary's back in the day. So thank you so much for that text. I appreciate you. We'll close things out with a call from Raider Vato. He's calling to talk about the Josh Jacobs situation, has his feelings on a few points that were thrown out about the running back position. And here's Raider Vato.
Hey, what's up, Q? This is Raider Vato, and I just want to call in and say, hey, man, you're doing a good job, but, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this Josh Jacobs thing, and, I get it, all the points he made were valid about, well, maybe, I'm not sure if you pointed them out or a caller did, how they were saying that, the teams that have the best running backs, it doesn't translate to actually winning Super Bowls. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could even look at Adrian Peterson, man. I mean, he never won a Super Bowl. I don't even think he ever even sniffed one. But he got paid big time money. 7 years, $96 million, $32 million guaranteed back in 2011. But yeah, he never won nothing. Yeah, he's all pro. Yeah, he's Hall of Famer, all that good stuff. But he ain't never won no championship. When you think about all the Super Bowls, what running back does come to mind? I can't really think of one. Maybe Marshawn, maybe Emmitt Smith. You know what I'm saying? What else? Who else? I really can't think of a running back where, that running back, he helped them to get to the Super Bowl or win the Super Bowl or whatever you want to say. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I get it. It just sucks, that Josh was out there waiting in the parking lot and stuff. That would have me heated, As far as the training camp thing, who knows? I mean, maybe he'll just show up because he'll be like, whatever, man. I'm only gonna make $10 million. Might as well get the money now. Because, like you said, there's no other team that's going to pay him more than that, even if they let him go. So, yeah, I mean, I just hope Josh, maybe he listens to the podcast, man, invest your money, and make the money work for you. Invest in the stock market, IRA, so that you have something for the future. And talk to Beast Mode, man. He's a businessman. Talk to that guy. See what he did with his money. Anyway, peace out, guys.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And yeah, I mean, I talked about the running back position and how the top dollar guy has never made his team either get to the Super Bowl or even win the Super Bowl, right? I went over the list of the running backs. I did that. But in my opinion, again, the running backs that didn't get it done, they all had, or they got there. They weren't big-time names, but they had quarterbacks that were big-time names, right? I mean, it's just simple as that. And Marshawn Lynch was probably the last big-time name running back that got his team to the Super Bowl and also won the Super Bowl. Everyone else was like a $2.5 million guy at most. So it's never been a top dollar guy. But, you know, as far as Jacobs taking care of his money, he's one of the smartest guys I know. He was taking care of his money before he even got to the pros, right? When he was in Nashville, before he got drafted, I remember him talking about, you know, wanting to go to the Raiders or potentially going to the Raiders because a couple of years they'd be in Vegas and there's no state tax, right? I mean, so he understands economics. So if there's one thing I'm never going to worry about when it comes to Josh Jacobs, is him taking care of his money. I have no doubt he's taking care of his money, but that doesn't mean that he can't get top dollar, right? I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like you can't just say, hey, we'll take care of your money and you'll be fine. No, he should take care of his money. He's probably taking care of his money. There's no doubt. I feel very strongly about that. But at the same time, he also should be able to get as much money as possible. So whatever he can get, whatever the market, you know, whatever the state of the running back position says he can get, go get it. Go get every single dollar. I'm not mad at you, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. I'm not mad at any player that gets the most money out there because we all know, I know, but we all should know that they're all one play away from no longer having a career. So thank you, Raider Vato. I do appreciate you, and that's going to do it for all the calls and texts. We still got a call from Brent out of L.A., a text from Raider Cal in Canada. We'll get to those on Monday. We'll talk about some veterans on Monday. On Saturday, there's going to be the battle for Vegas. That's the softball game, the Golden Knights versus the Raiders. So hopefully I'm out there and I'm able to get some audio from some of the Raider players. Hopefully I'll be able to bring that to the show on Monday. And, of course, news and notes. We got a lot to get to, right? And then all of a sudden, before you know it, training camp will be underway as the 26th will be the first day of practice. And you know I'll be out there for all of that. So until Monday, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Have a great weekend, and most importantly, just win, baby.